Hey there, we're at Farm.One. I'm Rob Lang. I'm the CEO and founder of the company. And we're with Marissa Siefkes. She's our sales director. She works with our chef customers all the time to bring them product and talk about deliveries and everything like that. And what we're doing today is we wanted to have a chat about the current situation. Obviously, New York is going through a crisis in the hospitality industry. And we thought we'd try to give some context around that, explain what our chef customers are going through, explain what we're going through as a business in this city, and maybe offer a little bit of advice to people who might have to go through a similar situation in the future. Today, it's March 18th, and so just recently, a few days ago, New York announced a ban on restaurants and bars being open. Obviously, some, and we'll talk about this, are still operating in a small capacity, but it's been a huge hit. So what I wanted to do is have a chat about that and how people are responding. Obviously, a really, really difficult time. But maybe let's go back a little bit and talk about what is your job? How do you work with chefs? What's it like on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so I have the privilege of working with our chef customers. I think it's the most exciting part of our operation because we're growing all this really incredible produce and we're growing it for chefs to use it. And chefs are some of the most creative people out there, and they have like a particular attention to their craft, but they also can create flavor combinations and new ways of presenting things, creating experiences for their guests that no one else has done before. So they're constantly looking for new product to innovate with, and we're able to provide that product at a really high quality, locally and fresh, and it's a dream. So it's a lot of fun to work with them. And we work with, at Farm.One, we work predominantly with restaurants. We do work with some bar programs, and we also work with some hotel food services as well. And then there are some public sales, so we can open up what we offer here to the public.
Sure. And tell us, before all this happened, what was like a typical day for you or a typical week as well?
Yeah, so I spend the majority of my time both here on the farm helping us plan for new orders that are coming in, whether that's planning space allocation. I also quality check every single product that goes out to customers to make sure it meets their needs and do some coaching on that end with the team. And then I get to do the really fun job of talking to our chefs about the product that they want. So I might host them here on the farm for a tour to taste the many hundreds of varieties of product that we're growing, or I might go to them and bring them product samples or just kind of see how their operation is working, check in with them, and help them plan for a new menu or something like that.
Yeah, sounds great. And obviously this is a hard working job. It takes a lot of hours, but what do you really love about it? Have you got like some particular memories over the last year or so that are fond memories and good times?
Yeah, so chefs are like artists and also business people. So they're always looking for that balance between like really high quality and something new and innovative and practicality. And I think one of the things that encapsulates this is watching a restaurant open. So it's very exciting to see the creative vision of a chef come to fruition when they're opening a restaurant. So some of the best experiences have been actually working with a chef who doesn't have a restaurant yet, maybe is just starting to like scout the location. And then you start to see kind of all of their kind of philosophy of cooking come out in the menu that they're developing, that we partner with them on, and in the space that they're designing. And then one of the best memories is going to a restaurant like the first week of its opening after working with that chef on the menu to select the microgreens for their particular dishes and like get to taste that product on the plate there after that chef has like poured his heart and soul into a business and has launched it with a full team of people who are like behind it and passionate about it and believe in that business.
Yeah. And maybe describe a little bit, we're a small producer, obviously we're kind of an unusual, purveyor for a restaurant. What kind of other relationships do they have with like large and small companies? Who does a chef order from on a weekly basis?
So chefs are placing orders for every ingredient they need in the kitchen if they're not growing that themselves, which we help a limited number of chefs do. So we are one of the smaller orders that they get each week. They are working with their vegetable purveyor, their meat purveyor, their seafood purveyor. They will form partnerships with farms, much like they do with ours, so that they know their farmer, they understand the product quality that's coming in, but then they can also go visit the farm. And so there's like a relationship there. And our product tends to be a fresh product that brings a bit of complexity to the flavor profile of the dish, or brings a really aesthetic beauty. So chefs get really excited about our product. But they're also really excited about the person who provides their tomatoes because they want to know the growing technique and all those things. So chefs have these deep relationships with their purveyors typically, and we're more of a kind of unique boutique type of purveyor with whom they love to be able to have that same relationship.
Yeah. And for people who don't know the hospitality industry that well, don't know restaurants as businesses that well, what are they like as businesses? I'll give you a hint, they don't tend to have loads and loads of spare cash laying around, right? They don't tend to, be businesses that are like VC funded or something like that. So tell me a little bit about that and how they work with their suppliers and keep themselves going.
Yeah. So most restaurants are ordering like what they need to get through a week of service at a time. They're placing orders very close to when they are plating that product and cooking that ingredient because they have really small margins. So every plate that's out there with price on a menu represents like a careful calculation of all of the components of that dish. And they, track their covers and see how many people they have coming in. And some of the finer dining restaurants who are ordering like extremely expensive products will kind of adjust those based on the business they're expecting. So really trying to run a tight ship. And a lot of people kind of go and experience this like fun and delight and luxury almost at a fine dining establishment, but it is a very tight margin.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the kind of illusions I think about the restaurant industry is when you walk into a place that has beautiful white tablecloths and you get served an expensive ingredient and, the service is quite formal or something, it might seem like the institution has a lot of money, but that's probably not the case, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So restaurants will, the ones who are really thoughtful about their sourcing for product will put that same thoughtfulness into their sourcing of like the plate that they use to plate on. And so you really get this experience that is the chef's vision kind of coming to life in the experience that you're having as a diner. But behind the scenes, that is costed out. And, restaurants can pivot if they're in a bit of a tight situation and might make subtle changes that you might not necessarily notice. So the whole point is for you to feel like you're being treated.
Yeah. But behind the scenes, there's often a really thin margin, right? And that's, something that, we have to work with that as a business as well. We've had a really good experience, I think, working with restaurants in terms of them paying on time and, being reliable, but it's something we have to be careful about as well because we need to run our business. So it's March 18th. The situation right now is something that I don't think any of us would have imagined a few months ago. When was the first time that you kind of had an inkling that this coronavirus situation was on the horizon? Do you remember like the first time you realized something was out there?
Yeah, so I think when we saw the virus come onto the news scene when it was starting to spread fairly rapidly in China, where it originated, we're starting to see patterns of behavior change there. And so it seemed like a very isolated case at the time, but the fact that people were kind of on lockdown, like not allowed to leave their homes, like that's a pretty significant measure that isn't often taken in modern day. So, you look at that and you think, that's really interesting. What might happen if we were in that position? And I think that as in New York City, we are a city of pedestrians, we're a diverse city, people are commuting all over the city, and so an impact like that would be huge, and it's just almost unimaginable as a New Yorker. So you kind of look at that and you're like, that would be really challenging, but I can't even imagine what that would be like if that were to be our situation.
Yeah. And do you remember, I mean, maybe you don't, but do you remember the first time it even came up in a conversation with a chef or someone that you were working with? Was there any inkling or anything like that?
Yeah, so we had a few, so last week, we had a few customers reporting going into the weekends, this would have been two weekends ago, that business was a little bit down. So they just weren't expecting as many covers. So we had a few purchasers and chefs get in touch with me to say that they wanted to reduce their order amounts, which I said before, restaurants tend to track these things pretty carefully. So during slower times of the year, like the summer, for example, when people can leave the city and there's less restaurant business, that happens. So we're, that's kind of a situation that isn't out of the norm. But certainly when it's starting to get warm out and like people should be going out to eat more, that's a significant behavioral change.
Yeah, because I mean, seasonally for us, we often find, as you said, the summer is pretty slow. Getting towards the end of the year, holiday season, like party season, basically, everyone's having a good time around December. Normally January there's pretty good trade. Sometimes February can be difficult because it's a short month as well, and it's cold, and maybe people aren't dining out as much. But yeah, kind of weird for people to be slowing down at the beginning of March, I guess. So talk me through the last sort of 2 weeks in terms of what the city has announced, what restaurants have experienced, people's attitudes to dining out, and how that's kind of become apparent in our relationship with those customers and the orders that we're delivering.
Yeah. So about a week and a half ago to 2 weeks, I mean, this has all happened in a very short period of time. Very rapid pace of change for kind of the way that our city is operating right now.
Sure.
But about 2 weeks ago, we started to see some order cancellations come in because business was down. I went out to eat at one of the restaurants and one of the chefs that I know, not a customer, but a personal relationship. And he was like, this was without any change from the government. He was like, wow, we had 40 cancellations of covers tonight. Whoa, that is a lot for one restaurant without any sort of government restriction. And then last Friday was the first time that a formal rule was put out for restaurants to follow, and government in New York issued that all venues with a capacity of under 500 had to kind of restrict. So there were some gatherings that were restricted of over 500 people, and then there were venues that had to cut their capacity allowed in that building by 50%. And that impacted all of our restaurants. So there were about 24 hours of advance notice. So restaurants had to, some of them who were fully booked, had to go through and inform customers that they couldn't come dine that evening. And then they had to kind of rejigger their reservation system and how they were planning service for the night and their ordering and everything all at once to anticipate that kind of reduction in business. And then for some of our businesses who don't rely heavily on reservations, they were just left wondering what on earth we're going to do. Like how many people are coming in?
And around the same time, just for people's context, I think this was when people were starting to talk about social distancing, working from home. We certainly stopped doing events and tours on the farm because it's a very close environment, and we felt like that wasn't maybe a great thing to keep on doing. But restaurants were still very much like open at this point, right? And I think, the interesting, it's all sad, so I don't want to, make little of it. But the interesting thing about that time was I think some people definitely had started to feel like, I don't want to be on the subway, I don't want to be going out, But then there was a whole other cohort of people who were really just continuing life as normal, right? And some of these restaurants that we're talking about are places where you would try to get a reservation weeks and weeks in advance, So there's a lot of sort of conflicting kind of messages and like ideas in people's mind about what to do, Anyway, I don't know if you have more to say about that, but that was...
No, certainly. And then when you have people working from home for long periods of time, you also have them wanting to get out and go do things. So there was... over the weekend in New York, after they made this capacity reduction, then there was a group of people who wanted to go out to bars and wanted to go out to restaurants. And the restaurants weren't really able to, few of them weren't able to kind of manage that demand, which was unexpected. And that led to a lot of pressure on the government to just completely close restaurants and bars, because with each day we were learning new information about the importance of social distancing and wanting to kind of see something top down that would indicate that the government was taking significant action to stop the spread of the virus.
Right.
So we then went into this week with a full closure in place for restaurants and bars for all of their dine-in service. And the majority of our customers are finer dining restaurants. Some did operate some limited delivery and takeout, but when a restaurant's restricted from having anybody in to eat and do dining and takeout, delivery and takeout only, that is like a 180 operational change for that business.
Sure. Yeah, and if you talk about I mean, Atera, right, across the hallway, their whole experience is, close to 20 courses. It's about a chef interaction. They're using a lot of very expensive ingredients, and even trying to translate that to like a delivery option, really, really tough, right? And so how did those conversations go with chefs at the beginning of this week when they, some of them are literally closing their restaurants, some of them are having to lay off staff who've been working with them for years. Like, what's that like?
Yeah, so starting with the 50% capacity cap, chefs knew that this was going to be a huge challenge to their bottom line. Because if you have 50% fewer people, you're also cutting hours for front of house staff and for prep staff because you simply don't need that. And so we saw this kind of steady need for restaurants to figure out staffing in this new scenario, and then all of a sudden they're closed, right? And so we saw our customer base kind of gradually over those few days decide to fully close their restaurants. Some proactively because they wanted to, support social distancing, and some because they needed to financially kind of maintain the cash flow that they had and not continue to kind of operate at a loss. It's an incredibly difficult decision. These are some of the most emotional days of my life because I'm talking to chefs who are laying off staff that they've worked for months and months to train up, and some of these restaurants are newer openings, and it was tough. And chefs feel everything they're doing so deeply. They wouldn't be in it if they weren't passionate about what they're doing. So it was very difficult be in my position having those conversations. But when they're closed for dine-in service, the vast majority are not going to be ordering product for a takeout or delivery option.
And as far as I sort of perceived it, for the first couple of days, people were thinking, oh, hey, we might just be closed for a week, or we might just be closed for 2 weeks. And I think if you're anything like me, the more media you read, the more it's actually, this might last for months, And so the prospect of closing down a restaurant, which still has to pay rent, still has to pay, some other utilities or insurance, all this kind of stuff. The prospect of closing down a restaurant for more than a couple of weeks, what does that look like to most restaurant businesses?
Really hard.
Yeah.
There's a decision to make about your staff, and no one wants to let staff go, especially with little notice, especially at a time like this where there obviously aren't going to be other restaurants and bars open for them to go work at. So we kind of saw, a decision-making process that, of course, we're not super privy to. But from the conversations I've had where chefs are deciding, okay, do I lay someone off indefinitely so that they can then get no employment benefits? Do I try to keep them on to do some limited delivery or takeout operation? And how does all of that work? Of course, the entire front of house of a restaurant, all the servers, a hostess, et cetera, those roles are greatly diminished, if not needing to be fully repurposed for those people to stay employed. Yeah. So really tough moral and ethical types of decisions, and it ultimately comes down a bit to the bottom line and just how much cash you have to keep operating.
Yeah, and I think the reality is a lot of these restaurants that are closed right now, that's it. They're kind of out of there, and that's why people are pushing the federal and the state governments to provide support, unemployment insurance, unemployment benefit, maybe this cash that people talk about, maybe the government providing might do something. What's your sense of how, I know everyone's just guessing right now, but if we are closed for a couple of months or something, what might that recovery kind of look like? Are there types of restaurants that you think might be able to bounce back versus other types? How do you see that kind of recovery maybe playing out?
The restaurants that are in a better financial position going into this will be in a better financial position coming out of this, and with a greater chance of reopening. Restaurants that were already struggling, and especially coming out of a winter where we typically see slower business, they usually rely on a big spring kind of boom in business to get them through the then slow summer months. So it's a very unusual situation, and there's no telling what's going to happen. I think there are going to be some creative solutions that people do find, but the challenge is we just don't know how long a closure is for at this point, and there's no way for the management to make any sort of future plans. Because there's no way of knowing.
Yeah. And talking about Farm.One then, like as you mentioned in the beginning, the vast majority of our customers are restaurants and bars. What have we seen? What's happening to us, and what are some things that we might be working on to get to the next stage?
Yeah, so everyone's getting really creative. So both chefs and, of course, we are. So there are still a few of our customers who are operating a pickup option or delivery option. One of the more innovative ideas that we've seen is the idea of delivering a full, like, 4-course dinner party. Yeah. Those are bigger ticket sales, and those are going to be kind of one set menu that you can order for on a minimum basis and kind of fulfill larger tickets almost as if someone were dining in. But it's not pretending that that's the same thing as operating a dine-in restaurant.
This is awesome, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, they've gotten really creative, and they're launching that tomorrow. Okay. So we are looking at customers using our product in strategic ways in that type of service, but that's going to become, we don't know what's going to become of that over time. So we're looking at like opportunities that we've been thinking about for a long time as a business, but haven't really had necessarily the capacity or the time to really explore fully. And they're really exciting. So one of the things that we're going to launch is a direct-to-consumer line. So we've done some one-off sales to private chefs and to home cooks and folks who just come in to tour the farm. They're like, oh, I love that bronze funnel. I got to get me some, and like request to order it. So we're going to make some of this exciting and like diverse crop of what we're growing available to the public so that they can access that. And I think that's especially important as we look at borders closing across the world. That doesn't apply to trade, but there's going to be this like sense of like wanting local supply, I think, coming out of this. And we're like really well poised to do that in the Manhattan area.
Yeah. Okay. So lots of creative ideas happening right now. I know you and I just worked on a photo shoot for some of these products. Obviously, as a business, we're trying to do things without requiring a bunch of our team to come to the location. We're filming right now after asking the skeleton staff who's maintaining the farm to leave so that we're not, in contact with other people. We're trying something new tonight as well with a different kind of filming. But it's tough, right? Like we have a lot of experiments on the go. Some of these may work, but do you have a sense of how other suppliers, other growers, are responding to this, or other things that they might be able to do?
Yeah, we're. I think there's capacity for us even to partner with some other growers in this effort, but we're seeing a lot of the same instincts. Like, we have this product, we planted it, it's ready to go. Like, let's figure out who else might want it that doesn't have access to it currently that we can then provide access to. So we're seeing more direct sales to consumers. That can take a few different forms. If it's a farm upstate, they might be operating a delivery route that they weren't operating before that goes to people's homes instead of to restaurants or bars. And we're seeing interest in both trying to move product that already exists, but then also kind of figure out like what's the demand for this product from a potentially different customer base. But there's a growing realization that the kind of business as usual is not going to be business as usual anymore. So there's a need to kind of like think really carefully about these next steps and be really scrappy, but also kind of like creative, and
on a personal note, like, how do you feel about the fact that we want to deliver a product, we want to keep our business running, we don't want to put anyone in our staff at risk, like as the person who runs the company, I don't want you to ever feel like you're coming in to do something that puts you at risk. Like, what's your feeling about that? Like, I'm just curious, like, how you feel?
It's kind of hard to wrestle with. I think we are a small company and we have a remarkably small staff for the amount that we do. And so I think we, as a whole, are kind of always operating on a bit of like a slim team and operating really efficiently. And it's hard. You don't, work at home when you're running a farm. That's just it. So there are many folks who are operating the farm who, if they didn't come in, there wouldn't be a farm. So it's hard to think about those things. And at the same time, I think we're being as responsible as we can be. The really tough, like personal part is seeing all of the relationships that we've built with the community, with our restaurant partners, and with folks who are interested in what we're doing kind of come to a standstill at this time because we are more kind of focused on our operation right now than kind of informing and purveying to that community that has been so critical to the farm and like a huge driver of, you know, new ideas and what we're doing.
No, I appreciate that. And one of the hardest things right now, and literally, Paige came in to film this, and like, we sort of had been video conferencing and stuff for a week now or something. And actually, like, I feel like one of the hardest things is all, chefs, front of house people getting laid off. Like, there's literally no way to like commiserate right now. It's really kind of sad and difficult. One of the things I'd like to kind of talk about is, I was born in Australia. I've lived in the UK, Australia, and Japan, and a lot of us on the team have various sort of other connections as well. And what I'm seeing, for instance, in Melbourne right now is I'm kind of seeing restaurants go through the beginning of the cycle that we observed, and I'm also kind of seeing people not think that this thing is going to affect them, or thinking they might be closed for a couple of days or something like that. I don't want to be too morbid about it, but also like I'm wondering, do you have advice for people in the situation about how serious it might get and what they maybe should start doing as a business to prepare for that?
Yeah, you've never seen something like this happen before, and so it's really hard to imagine it happening. But I think there was, like, once we started to see a capacity restriction and the government stepping in and saying, oh, social distance, work from home, like, this was inevitable. Like, it's inevitable that the places where people come to gather that are thought of as non-essential, because they truly are not essential for the survival of the patrons coming in, though they are for the incomes of the people who work there, I think it's inevitable that they will close if the government is taking steps to kind of step in. And we also had a number of customers who were voluntarily closing because they, it's not to say one decision is more ethical than the other, because you're supporting your staff, you're supporting the public. It's an impossible dilemma. But there's a lot at stake in making those decisions. And we did see some of our restaurants voluntarily close early. And I think a part of that is thinking ahead and saying, so we might get another week of sales, which truly could be very important for that company. But in thinking about the long term, like, what's the right decision financially for us to make? And I think a lot of folks never thought they would have to consider this type of decision. But I would say there are responses coming from like restaurant workers, like they're kind of standing up in their associations, kind of lobbying for certain relief deals from the government. And there are ways that people are starting to self-organize and advocate or use existing institutions. And also ways that restaurants are kind of appealing to their patrons and saying, like, hey, like, we have gift cards for the future, like, come, like, give us some boosts now, and like show us that, you're committed even though you're not coming in to dine, to what we're doing. And there are lots of ways that restaurants and their workers are looking to kind of self-navigate the situation.
So let's just remind people of what they can do right now to support the hospitality industry. You mentioned gift cards. A lot of restaurants are trying that right now. So, if there's a restaurant that you love or your friends like to go to, buying a gift card right now puts money in their pocket. It's going to be valid later. And that doesn't matter how long, things are closed for, they can honor that. Are there any other ways? We talked about delivery options. Right. People are doing delivery and pickup. I think the other thing people can do is, talking to their congressperson or talking to government, making sure this is an issue that people, have on their minds. I think that, my sense is that it's going to be a while until something good comes out of this, but perhaps a good thing that may come out of it is, more stability for people in the hospitality industry in terms of healthcare, wages, insurance, liability, all that kind of stuff. Do you kind of share that hope as well?
I hope so. I mean, there are some efforts right now to really creative solutions like dining bonds, where you can kind of donate to a bond that will then give a restaurant some cash. And there are so many ideas that people are coming up with. And that like there's a gap when people are coming up with these ideas, right? So I think there will be something to come out of it in that regard with respect to whether it's employment or benefits for restaurant staff. I think there's also kind of a larger economic solution that's needed right now, because the hospitality industry is by far the most impacted like industry overall, but we're also seeing impacts on travel. Hotels are kind of taking like a strange double hit right now. So this is something really big that's happening, and there are going to be large scale solutions, and there are going to be really positive things that come out of this potentially far in the future for the hospitality industry itself. And I think another thing that we're seeing is like restaurants get really creative about how to engage their audiences, and like whether that's through virtual cooking. So we're going to see as well, I think, communities build around chefs and around restaurants that are trying to kind of share what they're doing with others. So there's going to be a community building element for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think that, people are getting really creative right now, online, virtual delivery, pickup, I think there's some really good stuff happening. It remains that it's a sad time. It's really difficult, I think, for everyone. But yeah, I appreciate you sharing everything to everyone. And I think, if there's more you want to know about this kind of stuff, we're right here, to talk about it. And so we'll be engaging more with people on social and talking about, ways that we're reacting to this, and maybe just uncovering some ways that our customers also are dealing with this situation. So yeah, I'll end, I do want to try to be positive. I think there's loads of creative people out there in New York, but also in other cities that are affected. I think that everyone really wants to, use this as a way to improve, but we've got to get through the next few months and stay positive, I guess. So thanks, Marissa, and thanks for watching.